Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first session today. Our session is Toy Sourcing, the Next 10 Years, presented by Steve Reese. Steve?
Morning, all. Can you hear me okay? Okay, that's a good start. Normally, I've already broken the IT by this stage of any presentation, but that's a good start. So I'm going to talk to you about Toy Sourcing. I've got about 20 minutes. I may flick the odd slide because there's quite a lot of data, but what I'm just going to try and do for you is two things. One is to show you how and why the world of toy sourcing has changed and will continue to change. And then the second section is what you can do about it. So hopefully this makes sense. We haven't got a lot of time, so I'm going to skip my own introduction and just say I'm a bit of a toy lifer like many of you. I've been doing it since around the turn of the millennium. I used to work for Hasbro many years ago, but they've long since forgotten me. So yeah, it's about all you need to know. So straight into toy sourcing. So this is the traditional toy company approach to sourcing. Can we save some money on manufacturing by switching factory? And anyone who's ever worked in the world of trying to persuade toy companies to switch factory, that's literally the first question. Save me 10% and I'll look at it. And the classic way that a factory would approach that is, okay, we'll give them 10% off the first product, 7% off the second round, 2% off the next, and then we'll be the same price as anyone else, but then we've got them hooked because people don't lightly move. But the reality is there's an underlying assumption that we haven't really recognized underneath that whole chase for cost, price. And the thing is, it's understandable because the biggest cost center you have as a toy company is manufacturing. Unless you get some, I don't know, crazy lawsuit or something, you're going to be spending, say, a third of your turnover on manufacturing. So it's completely understandable. But actually, there's something you need before you need a good price, which is you need production capacity. Because if you don't have production capacity, it doesn't matter what the price is. If you've got no product, you're not in business. So we've taken for granted for a very long time the fact that we have abundant production capacity from factories who know what they're doing, who are 99.9% of the time compliant, and who we can work with. So why have we taken that for granted? Well, there's one very large reason for that, which is China. So China's been an absolute powerhouse of both efficiency and capacity in toy manufacturing for decades, for as long as most of us here have been in the toy industry. We haven't had to think about or question capacity because there's been massively abundant capacity in China, and therefore it's been easy for us. So just quickly to look at where we are in the context of where we came from. Before, obviously, most of us only know China as the primary toy production hub in the world. Not for everything, but for most things. Before China's rise, manufacturing was fragmented. So if you talk to like the real old-timers, they'll tell you, we used to produce toys in Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Haiti, Spain, et cetera, and it was really inefficient and quite difficult to manage. But we had to source it that way in order to get sufficient capacity and access to sufficient labor. What happens when China rises up is you get this huge population of people who are very, very poor, desperate to work and earn money and feed their families. And so China deployed this massive low-cost labor pool, and that's really good for us because the majority of toys are new every year, so it's quite difficult to justify automation, so we need labor. So China was a perfect opportunity for us in the toy industry. But things have changed. So I'm going to say I'm in my late 40s, pushing the big 50. And the image you can see here, this image with all the people in similar clothing on bicycles, that's the China that I saw in my childhood. Okay, but that's also the China of the time when China started to enter into this world of toy manufacturing in a big way. Those are the people who we were employing in our factories. And as you can see, look, it's just historical reality. At that time, China had a very poor labor force and a fairly backward agrarian economy. But if we fast forward to here, it's not New York skyline. I think it's Shanghai. Basically, I would argue that China's economy has in effect matured beyond the point whereby if you started again, it would logically be the place to put toy production, making $3 or $4 products. China today, if you started from fresh with none of the history and expertise, would be a better place to produce real cars than toy cars. That's reality. There's a lot of data here, and I don't have that much time. So I'm just going to point to like basic trends here. This one here is my favorite graph. This is basically China's economic miracle. Hopefully I'm not blocking anyone's view. This is China's economic miracle in one graph. So if you look at this, China has in effect, over the course of my working lifetime or since I was a child, taken hundreds of millions of people out of pretty much abject poverty and pretty much eradicated. Okay, comparatively, you could say you can go somewhere in China and see people who are poorer than they might be in Manhattan, but comparatively speaking, China's economic miracle has been an amazing thing for the Chinese people. And that's what's really changed. Here's the challenge, though. This is the bit where things change. So this is like a very boring population pyramid, if any of you did, I don't know, geography or whatever in school. And you can see China's population pyramid on the right-hand side. That's unfortunately what an unhealthy population pyramid looks like. Quite a lot of older people, an aging population, nowhere near enough younger people coming up to either support the same industries as we had previously, or even to support the older generations. So this is a problem. And if you look at this quote here, this is from the South China Morning Post, which is normally my source of news relating to Hong Kong and China. Basically, a lot of manufacturing workers are getting on in age, so they're not getting replaced by young people who don't really want to do that type of work, seemingly. And that's a big problem. So within a couple of years, we're due to be about 30 million manufacturing jobs short, or workers short in China. And that's a big problem when we rely so heavily on labor to produce toys. That's India's population pyramid on the left-hand side. That's what a healthy population pyramid looks like. Now look, the reality is there's some reasons why people aren't living as longer, which are probably not entirely positive, which relates to life expectancy, etc. And that will probably change over time. But right now, we're reliant largely on this country with unfortunately a demographic problem, and not on countries like India on the left. Look, this is a projection. As we all know, for those of us who do sales forecast, they're always wrong. The question is just, have you shipped too much inventory, now you've got a problem, or have you lost sales and you've got a different problem? It's the same with these kind of projections. It's bound to be wrong, we just don't know in which direction. But literally, this is the United Nations saying that China's population could nearly halve this century unless something changes in terms of the demographics. That's how much of a challenge this is for China as a nation, but for us as toy people who've become so reliant on China as a toy production hub. So just to be clear, first things first, because I do sometimes get this accusation, I'm absolutely not anti-China. You can have all your own preferences. I grew up with Chinese culture, Eastern culture, have Chinese friends, etc., etc. But I'm just telling you reality as I see it. So China's definitely not leaving the toy business, and this is definitely not an anti-China message from me. You may get those kind of messages elsewhere, not from me. So the second biggest toy market in the world currently is China. So obviously it makes sense for China and all that amazing capacity and knowledge to be supplied from the home market. More automated and high-tech items are more likely to remain in China as their manufacturing kind of scales up. And I've also seen a lot of OEM factories try and make the move into being toy companies to, basically to be competing directly with some of you. Frankly speaking, I've seen some people, do that successfully and some not, but that's the way it goes. The bottom line here is, just because of time, I'm just going to go to the bottom point here. Today, China is still manufacturing 80% there or thereabouts, plus maybe a bit more of the toys, but that share is declining. And that's the thing that should concern you if you're trying to plan for the next few years. I'm going to skip that slide for time. Okay, so I've shown you the, if you like the socio-demographic picture here, but where's the actual evidence that that's affected anything related to toy production? This is the reality. Okay, we're basically going from a primarily single hub manufacturing situation, where the vast majority of toys are produced in one country, to a multi-hub solution. In effect, we're going back to what we had before China's rise, which is you'll still continue to get some toys from China, you'll get some from Vietnam, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. That's where we're going. But don't just take my word for it. This is a little bit old. This is a few years. This is before the pandemic. But basically, like various other people like me who are industry commentators and whatever, I look at data. And the toy companies themselves, the biggest toy companies, announced to the stock market that they would have 50% or perhaps even more of their toy production outside of China. So why is that the case? Because some of you might be sat there saying, well, I'm still more or less 95% in China and it's not really been a problem. The difference might be the amount of production. So if you came to me and said, move $1 million of production for me tomorrow, I could do it like that. Okay, we have to find tooling, etc. But it's very easy and straightforward to find the capacity. If you're doing $1 billion worth of manufacturing, you can't move that quickly. So these guys, aside from the fact, and apologies to anyone here from my ex-employers Hasbro, but if you're basically run by bean counters and lawyers in order to keep the stock market happy, look, the reality is you have to look at risk as much as you look at opportunity. And that's why these guys are to be honest, significantly ahead of the game. And if you look at the bottom bit of information there, so this is all public domain data, by the way. I'm not going to share anybody's data unless it's in the public domain or I have expressed permission. So you could find all this data the same as me. But Hasbro's China vendors in 2018, there were 48. And in 2022, this is Hasbro's own supplier list, which they publish, 36. So that's a big change. And if you look at the Hasbro non-China vendors, they've not grown that much. But what happened at the same time, basically, if you're running factories down, you're starting other factories. So they actually started before 2018 to ramp up production in some of those other factories. This is, again, all public domain data. So Hasbro, I mentioned, if you look at the number of factories there in China, 36, but they've got a total of 80 factories which they're publishing to the world. Well, that's quite a lot less than you might expect, and it's definitely a lot less than would have been the case 10 years ago. Mattel's actually a slightly different creature in the sense that Mattel is rare nowadays. Aside from maybe Lego, they own some of their own factories, and Mattel's own factories make some of the biggest, most iconic products. So they're already quite diversified because of that. Because some of those factories, the ones which do quite high volumes on the real core brands like Barbie and Hot Wheels, are some of them outside of China, so Malaysia, Indonesia, etc. Mattel's biggest plant now, according to public information, is the Mexico plant, which probably tells you quite a lot about the moves there. So although it looks like, in terms of pure numbers, Mattel is not that diversified from China. They don't publish this data, but if you looked at spend per factory, you'd find that the spend outside of China probably looks different to that picture. Lego, we often forget Lego in this conversation because they have all their own factories primarily, and they're all over the place. They're as close to the biggest markets they supply as they can get them. Okay, there's a new factory in the USA. There's one quite advanced in construction in Vietnam. So in effect, you're seeing that it's not just people who are outsourcing; it's also people who are having their own factories and moving this away. This is crikey. This is possibly the most risky part of my presentation. So I'm just going to try and see if there's anyone likely to come up on the stage because I'm about to enter politics. I hate to do this, but I've got to. Geopolitical tensions have risen. I think we'd all agree with that. And two great nations are involved. That's as much as I'm going to say. But here's the thing here. This is a great concern, right? It's a great concern as a risk. Whether there's any reality beyond saber rattling and we need to do this against them and whatever, that's beyond really our consideration here because you can't affect that. I don't know, maybe you can't, but anyway. What really matters for us here, though, is the fact that this is now a risk, and so we have to take that into account. And that's why friendshoring and nearshoring are becoming a lot more prevalent. And you will hear people saying, so-and-so retailer said to me, you need to move X amount of manufacturing outside of China by this date because, we're a major retailer, we're stock market listed, it's too much of a risk, we can't have that risk. And that's whether there's any actual reality. If anything happened in this part of the world, I'm not going to name anywhere because I don't know how to do it without offending someone. look, if anything happened on that particular island, it's not going to help anything in the toy industry. But the point is right now, because there's a perceived risk and it's in the media all the time, toy companies, manufacturing companies in general, are taking account of this, because you will not get products easily through that strait if there's any kind of conflict, and there'll certainly be all kinds of sanctions and whatever else flying around. So hopefully I've survived that part of this. War in Europe, also not an easy topic. Yeah, look, I mean, really the bottom line is there was some quite good toy manufacturing in Eastern Europe, but it was mostly using Ukrainian labor, obviously not really available to the same degree. So the picture's changed. Funny story, I actually was doing a project for a fairly large toy company looking at the options for toy manufacturing in Europe, and the presentation presented 2 days after Russia entered Ukrainian territory. So yeah, that was a bit of a waste of time, that project, sadly. But the bottom line anyway is oil prices are high. That's probably pretty much, from a North American perspective, all you really need to know from a toy perspective. Okay, I've survived the geopolitics and no one's stormed the stage, so we'll go on to what the alternatives are. Here's the challenge. In 4 minutes and 12 seconds, for me to give you a good overview here, nothing's going to be as perfect or as easy as China ever again. I could put the microphone down now because that's the bottom line. The sourcing function is going to be much harder for you to manage now and 10 years in the future than it was 10 years previously. Sorry, but that's just the way it's going to be. If we just compare, I really hate how that Thailand thing's gone over the line there. Apologies for that. But if we basically look at some of the data on here, let's start with population. 1.4 billion people in China. Vietnam, which is kind of like the immediate choice for a lot of people, and also a lot of Chinese-owned factories for the next location. Only 100 million people. Well, that's going to be limited capacity, isn't it? It has to be. It's just basic math. India has a large population. Not so many toy factories so far, but growing. So there's some potential there. Mexico, I struggle to get good data here. If anyone has good data on how much OEM toy manufacturing comes out of Mexico, please share it with me. I'll buy you a drink, whatever. Mexico is a definite option, especially in North America. It comes with its own challenges and problems, which you all here will probably know better than me, as I'm from far away. The good thing about Mexico is, in terms of labor availability, is obviously the northward migration. It might cause many other problems, which again I'm not going to go into elsewhere, but basically Mexico has a really good labor pool and will continue to, and it's close to market. Historically, that kind of production facility was used for big products that basically weren't viable to ship over the ocean from Asia, but increasingly it's becoming a place for other things as well. Thailand, Malaysia, some opportunity, but they're quite small. Indonesia is probably the third easiest option, because after Vietnam, quite a few factory owners are going to Indonesia. So if people say to me, what's the easiest, smoothest transition in sourcing, it's basically Vietnam first, Indonesia second. If you actually want diversified supply chain, it's India, because India is the only country in the world that can rival China for population. It's much cheaper labor. The local supply chain in the 10 years or so I've been going to India has massively increased. So if you want true diversification, like India is really the only strong option. Vietnam, as some of you will know, when China was shut for COVID, Vietnamese factories couldn't really produce because some of the components came from China. So, but look, here's the reality. We're going to have to change the way we do things, because that massive chunk of OEM production which is coming out of China in all those factories is kind of going to have to change. I'm going to skip the commentary just for time, because I've got 90 seconds left, and I need to tell you two things still. So this is the immediate thing. So I've consulted with a lot of toy companies from big to small on this topic, and I can tell you, option one is like the ostrich with a head in the sand, China only. You know what, frankly, unless you know something I don't, it's probably not that prudent an option anymore. China plus one is what a smaller or medium-sized company would tend to do to diversify, but without having to set up teams all around the world. True strategic diversification is what you're going to have to do if you turn over, more than a few hundred million. And self-manufacture and nearshoring is obviously a part of the mix. Most excitingly, in the remaining 48 seconds, I can tell you what the future looks like beyond the next 10 years. At some point in time, maybe I'll be long gone, maybe I'll be retired on the beach somewhere, maybe you will be too. But at some point in time, whereas historically you would have say an office, and then next to it a warehouse or logistics hub, And then in the olden golden days, you might have a production facility. That could come back. I think it's likely to come back because basically the reason why we can't use automation so well now is because it's expensive and it's not flexible enough. So you can get a robot that's really good at going like this, but you can't then change it very quickly to do something else. That's going to change because artificial intelligence will help us to do that, and the robots will get ever more flexible. So over time, you probably are moving towards less sourced miles away from market, which is quite good for ecological reasons and time reasons and cash flow reasons, and more production at home. I literally finished right on the dot there, and no one had to pull me off stage. So there's some more information on the stuff I do if you're interested. Thank you for listening. If anybody wants to ask any questions, I'll try and invent some interesting answers for you. I'll be over there after. Thanks. Oh yeah, go and put that back in.